Hello and welcome to a short presentation on end-to-end management and orchestration and the role that it plays in helping us to manage disruption as an organisation. My name is Neil Hill. I'm a partner with Oliver Wight, and it's my pleasure to be here to spend the next 30 minutes just taking you through some thoughts and trying to give you some perspective and try to, I guess, open some thoughts in your own heads around what's going on and how do we plan to manage that and deal with it moving forward, because I guess we're all becoming experts and experienced both professionally and personally in dealing with some of the disruption that's taken place globally over the last 18 months to 24 months. And I guess our role is really understanding how we push the boundaries and think in a different way to try and understand risk. Now, obviously, some of the material that we're going to share with you is Oliver Wight IP, so please obviously treat appropriately. And if you do need to or would like to hear more or understand and share some of the slides, then please contact our main office in Europe, where you'll see the address on the screen in front of you. So in terms of the agenda for today, obviously, I'd like to say we only have 30 minutes on a subject that we could probably spend the next 2 days talking about and really still not cover all the angles. So we're going to do a real introduction, a short introduction to what have we seen in terms of disruption over the last 18 months, 24 months. What are we seeing, with clients that we're working with industry, with business globally. Some thoughts around how do we manage sources of disruption and variation, and how do you do that in a formal way, and then also the role, bringing this all back together, the role that the end-to-end supply chain organisation plays in really helping to augment and improve our business continuity planning activities and really driving resilience, across the responses we have. And then we'll kind of summarise and leave you with a few closing thoughts, which you can follow up on if you need to with us afterwards. Okay. I guess what we all recognise is that the last 18 months, 2 years have been pretty disruptive for all manner of reasons. And I guess, often the heading of COVID, the pandemic, is seen as the big villain in the plot. But I guess when we actually look into many of the sources of change, they may have been amplified or accelerated by the pandemic, but many of them were things that were evolving and developing over time, and we maybe have just been blind to what has been developing in front of us. And our system and our planning processes and the way we organise have become disconnected from the reality of today's world. And I guess that's playing out in my mind in many organisations today, where they are looking to completely rethink the way they've organised commercially and from a supply chain perspective and the financial implications to drive a different approach that is driving resilience. So when we think about the impact of COVID, there's the direct impact that it had. So obviously through lockdowns, really working globally from east to west, shortage of labour as we've closed facilities, interruption in supply of both raw and commodity products and components that are going into other supply chains, semiconductors being a great example. Through then into the demand profiles we've seen. So traditional views, projections of demand, now no longer are true because people are behaving in a different way. Like many of you, I've spent the last 18 months working from my office rather than with clients, so my behaviours have changed. Spend on air travel, accommodation, etc., have all changed, almost overnight really, and that in its own right has caused us to have to rethink commercially, but then also rethink from a supply chain perspective in the way we've organised. I guess that demand has been further changed, amplified by, I guess, savings that people have made during lockdown, so available income in some cases, not in all cases, I understand, and that has led to different spending behaviours within customers and markets, and also then obviously the big shift in money or available money in terms of economic stimulus that governments are throwing in to try and kickstart economies. I think the latest figure I saw from North America was like $3 trillion. Now that in its own right is a block of money that's being spent on infrastructure and building and all the things that we see when countries are trying to rebuild economies or fire their economies up, and they are driving increased demand in raw materials, so construction materials, timber being a great example. And that in itself is spiking supply chains, causing scarcity, etc. And I guess then there is other things like the change in political landscape. So, we are seeing, as nations came under pressure from COVID, and economics and quality of life changed and came under pressure, governments have done what they believe to be the right thing for obviously their own national interest, but actually have changed the way that they've been interacting. And again, is a shift in what we know to be true, and therefore what's built into our planning cycles. And there's tensions, at a global level, China, US, Russia, EU, but then also as we come into Europe and think about the tensions between member states that have started to develop as, vaccine scarcity came about, now with energy constraints. Again, the national interest is becoming a big agenda item, especially with large elections in key government states taking place. So there's lots of stuff that's changing that we believe were stable, and therefore had almost screened them out of our planning cycle as changing assumptions. And I guess the spike then that we're seeing more locally now around inflation on prices. Rapidly growing in raw materials, in items that are going into supply chains, labour availability, skill shortages, just body shortages. Levels of unemployment in many countries are at all-time lows, but there are scarcities in things like lorry drivers and shipping, etc., which are all causing this kind of constraint within the global supply chain, I guess. And I guess more latterly then, when we think about the growing energy concerns around gas prices, oil prices, petrol availability in the UK particularly, are all having a profound effect on the way we believe the plan was going to play out versus what we're actually seeing. And I guess it got me to kind of thinking about this concept of what I term as scarceonomics, so our ability of dealing with scarcity. And the way that it's changing the way we behave and the way we protect and create, resilience within our business and pretty much our supply chains. So key that we think about that as a concept. And when we look around what we've seen as an organisation, so all over Wight, as we've worked with clients, we've discussed at various forums, there is a big shift in the way that organisations and leaders particularly are behaving, in that obviously the impact of COVID and potential activities that are downstream from that have forced lots of change in the short term. And leaders, execs and functional leaders have been drawn down into that management of symptoms in the short term horizon. So in the 1 month to 3 month kind of zone. And that in its own right means we are planning and reacting rather than taking a medium to long range view of what we believe could be true and organising accordingly. And I guess that has set a tone within businesses where actually we're now starting to see a lot more mistrust of both the organisation looking out when it thinks about its customers, global economies, etc., but also internally as well. When we see maybe the traditional friction between the commercial organisation and the supply chain organisation has amplified. If only the commercial guys could mark down what they believe to be true, then we could organise supply chain. And if only supply chain would do what it needed to do, then we wouldn't have to reorganise from a commercial perspective. So that tension has become real again, and is driving non-value added and tensions that are really diluting the impact of businesses. And I guess that high level of distress that we have seen across supply chains mean that there is just all sorts of replanning, change activities going on in the short term to try and do something in the absence of the required materials or labour, etc. In a lot of cases, we're seeing people running products that are not necessarily required as part of demand, but they're the only products they can run based on materials and availability of skills. And obviously that's doing a number of key things. One is increasing our cost base, driving working capital, but also reducing the reliability of our service and then driving impact on customer confidence which all of which bring increased tension to our organisation. So that, I guess, that spiral downwards into chaos is something that as a leadership team we need to take a step back and work out how we deal with that, the symptoms effectively, but also think about what do we need to replan and reorganise for the future to stop these bow waves continuing to roll over us. And I guess that's the essence of where we're going to go, the next few slides, is really understanding the mechanisms and the way we need to think in order to recognise that variation exists and to consider what we could do with that variation should it occur. And I guess many organisations recognise, obviously, that the further out in time that we go, then the less certain the outcome. Time brings variation, and variation brings uncertainty. And so I guess having mechanisms within our planning process that allow us to consider, reflect on, and organise around that potential variation is key. And the slide that's on the screen in front of you is a pretty simple model, but it's one that is more driving a behavioural shift and I guess a vision shift when we're thinking and planning. And that is that we have a process and a mechanism that allows us, from a bottom-up perspective, to understand what we believe to be the most likely outcome of our plans. So whether that's commercial, whether it's supply chain, financials, the overall business outcome, what do we believe to be true and where do we think that will take us? And then our job is to really understand, against what we believe to be true, what are the forces that could act against it, i.e. dilute it, the vulnerabilities, and what are the things that could act in its favour and amplify or take it forward, so the opportunities that are not within the plan. And I guess it's key to remember and consider that when we're talking about vulnerabilities, they are vulnerabilities of elements that are already included in our plan. So we are organising to deliver them, but there is a probability that something may occur that could cause us, to undershoot. Now our job is to really understand what they are, consider what we could do to protect against them, and decide which are the defence mechanisms, insurance policies, whatever you want to describe them as, that we would like to invest in as an organisation, and we go do that. Now that could be pricing, it could be stock, it could be all manner of different choices that we've got to ensure that an outcome is as likely as possible. But what we also know is that there are things that are over and above our current plan, so things that could be additional. And if we ignore them, then they have a habit of coming true and we're not organised to deliver them. So our job is to really state those opportunities in a quantifiable way and with a level of probability that allows us to actually, we believe we should organise for these activities and invest in making them true. So again, it could be early launch of a product, it could be entry to a new market, so setting up a commercial organisation, it could be, I don't know, a distribution centre in a region that gives us access to the local market. But all of which are choices that we need to invest in to then deliver a return. But the key is that commercial, supply chain, finance, the business are all considering the vulnerabilities and opportunities in the same way and responding as a team, not as a function. And often we see, commercial responding in one way, supply chain operating in another way, and finance having to try and decide financially what they believe the outcome to be. Where in actual fact, if we did this together, then actually we'd get a better answer. And our job really is to understand what sits behind the red and the green. So what are the assumptions? What do we believe to be true? And what are the recommendations that we're proposing? And as an organisation, which are the ones that we want to activate and bring to life? Now, often, and I guess this is a state of mind, often uncertainty or variability is seen as a negative. And I guess if we recognise that variability and uncertainty exist, and we have a process that allows us to manage that and deal with it, then we no longer become the victim of uncertainty, and at its risk. But we're actually now in a position where we can start to see it, respond to it, and take an advantage from that. Now, to do that, that's not just an entitlement that we all have. We have to have key things in place that allow us to do that. I guess one is a base requirement, which is reliable foundational processes. So whether that's our plan and execution structure, our purchase order processes, our supplier, validation and kind of approval process, all of that stuff that helps us bring reliability in an uncertain world has to be there to allow us to really see the sources of variation rather than just the outcome of the ineffective process and structure. Now, if we have that baseline and we have that kind of foundation, then we need mechanisms that allow us to see change occurring in a near as real-time way as possible, and to then consider that and bring that into our planning cycle and drive that as a way that we consider our response and think about how we reorganize. And what we often find, when we talk to organizations, when an unplanned event has taken place, is that there were people in the organization who acknowledged the symptoms were developing. So it could be a commercial office in a particular region. It could be, I don't know, part of our supply chain. So it could be suppliers of scarce raw materials who are seeing everybody's activities. So people are seeing, and there is information there, and often the challenge is seeing it quickly enough, integrating it into our cycle, and then validating it in terms of its, its impact, and then deciding which are the key things that we need to blend together when we're reorganizing. And reorganizing, think about replanning and the way that we're going to adjust our plans moving forward to respond to the new situations that are developing. And if we're able to do that, then we are able to respond quicker in a more agile fashion, and often take a first mover advantage. So whilst people are still worrying and concerned whether change is actually taking place, we have spotted it, we've analysed it, and in many cases have already got plans on the shelf to respond to it, and are off doing the new plan before our competitors or our customers may even have kind of realised. Now, to do that, that's not, as I said, there's a sequence of things that need to be in place, but also, when we think about availability of data and information, and just the scale of information in today's world, then people aren't always the best at trying to pick out trends and make recommendations or even take action. So the application of machine learning, artificial intelligence in the big data space is really key to making this simpler, quicker, and allowing us to take that first mover advantage. Now, if we are able to do all those things and are able to connect it back into our planning process, then we become a lot richer in the considerations and therefore the strength of the plan that we're developing. And I guess it's where integrated business planning and end-to-end supply chain planning and orchestration really come together to give a higher order level of business resilience if we're thinking and behaving and driving in a new way. And I guess that's moving away from the traditional virtues of lowest cost, deep sea sourcing, all the things that we've chased for the last decade and beyond, and thinking about resilience as a key part of our business offering. So the integrated business planning model that's on the screen in front of you is not a surprise. It's not new in concept. But I guess the principles of connecting commercial, so our product portfolio and roadmap, our demand, sales and marketing activities, and supply chain is key. But when we think about the changes that we've encountered and experienced over the last 18 months, so too is understanding change as it's occurring in the product space and services space. Of what are people doing? What do they want more or less of? And how does that affect our portfolio of offering? What do we see in terms of demand from a sales perspective? So unit volumes changing and shifting based on behaviours or business activity, and how does that connect to supply chain? But also from a supply chain perspective, just the risks that are inherently in the way we've organised our supply chain network over the last decade. And I guess taking a step back on all of those things and having a real honest appraisal of what risk have we, engineered that we really haven't considered. So it's inadvertent risk, but actually is playing out in today's world. So key that we've got that, and that our integrated planning process is bringing all of that information together and allowing us to respond and act accordingly as a business, not with different parts of our business going off in their own separate ways and diluting the overall impact. Now what we do know when we drill this down to supply chain is that often supply chain is considered and managed on a node by node basis. And actually, there's only limited things we can do because the inputs are fixed and the outputs are fixed within that node to change and manage risk. So I guess the big mobilization of the end-to-end concept, where we're looking across all of those connected nodes within our supply chain, how they're connected, what do those connections mean, what contracts do we have if they're secondary or external parts of our supply chain, and how does that allow us to respond and reorganize as required, to accommodate change that occurs. So thinking as a supply chain end-to-end network is vital when we're looking at the responses we develop. And I guess when we think about the principles of resilience, we are getting into the space of the investment structure we've got. Do we have the right footprint? Can we reorganize sources of supply rapidly and routes to markets rapidly should interruption occur? So the agility of the supply chain, which often has a dollar value associated or cost associated with it, but also what service are we guaranteeing with this new investment and the new structure that we are recommending. So really key that we're thinking in the broadest of terms and able to verbalize and quantify that so that we can see the business value that comes with the required investments that we're looking to make. And I guess at the heart of that process is the concept of central planning and management, where there is a central organization, so our central supply chain control towers, or whatever you'd like to describe them as, planning hubs, who are taking a global view of what's going on and looking at all the assets and structure that's at our disposal to solve the problems. Now many organizations, whether they own the network or are just a part of the network, still have visibility of it, can still see the construction and the flow of the process. That's either developed over time or we've engineered over time. And I guess the challenge becomes, in my mind, one where we stop thinking about the network as a fixed, and we think about it as a series of flexible nodes or flexible entities that we can reconnect and reconfigure to respond to things as they change over time. And that resilience, that agility in the network structure, I think is key, and is something that we've lost as businesses over time. And that's not just driving the strategic supply chain roadmap, but is also then starting to think about the risks that exist within the nodes that we have connected today. How critical and how impactful would that risk be should it occur, and what could we do differently to neutralize that risk? And I guess my background as an engineer, I fall back on some of the tools and techniques, so process failure mode effect analysis. So failure mode effect analysis, when we're thinking risk in a supply chain, actually is quite a powerful concept. And so we need to be assessing the risk of something becoming true, the impact that it would have. And I guess impact is not only the point of time with which it occurs, but how long does it take us to recover? So things like mean time to recover should be part of our risk assessment. And risk assessment in this context we need to change our thought process. This is a dynamic process that is evergreen and ever refreshed when we're thinking about the link between risk management and business continuity planning. And this is not just a corporate exercise because we've been asked to carry out our annual corporate business continuity planning desktop exercise. This is something we do because it adds value, it allows us to stay cognizant of developing situations, and that we've got a series of responses that we're going to exercise as a result. And I guess in my mind, when I was putting this slide deck together, the image of a 1930s telephone switchboard kept popping into my mind. And whilst I didn't put it on a slide because it's kind of going back a little way, the essence of somebody sat there and just replugging and changing as things are required if we think about that as a concept within our central supply chain plan and orchestration process, what's changing? What do I need to connect to where? How do I do that? Now, what you also recognise, that's not a right in its own context either. So I have to think about routes to market, customs compliance. If you've got product that needs to be certified into different regions, again, how do I gain that certification and have different routes that have got different certifications should I need them? Now none of that is free, right? So we have to make choices about the risk versus the impact versus the reward, and decide as a business how do we want to lay our cards out on the table. And I guess the challenge, and maybe some of what we've experienced over the last decade, is I think we've become numb and neutral to risk. I think we've chased after, all that PPV, purchase price variance, and cost, and all the things that we know and love, and actually have allowed ourselves to not think about the implications of that. So, the increasing level of onshoring suggests that people are starting to make those choices and start to drive that. But I guess in my mind, as we think about the slide I showed you earlier, what we need to be able to do, and what we need to make a key characteristic of our organisations, is the use of contrarian thinking the unthinkable. So what would happen if? And I guess, if we're thinking in a failure mode effect analysis kind of way, then we can say these are all the potential suite of things that could occur, and then we quantify them and kind of rate them in terms of probability. But the power of contrarian thinking is absolute when we're thinking about trying to stay conscious and cognizant of risk, and be in control of it and use it as an advantage. So I'd urge you to think about that. What does that mean? And it's, often in organisations that we work with, when this is prevalent, there's somebody whose job within the sessions is to think the unthinkable, think the opposite. So not follow the group, but directly change and choose something different. So think about the power of that and what it adds to your planning process, but especially when we're thinking about risk and the management thereof. Now, if I've got a lot more consciousness in the risk space, if I understand in a more detailed way the way I've got my assets deployed and structured within my global supply chains in an end-to-end way, then I can really start to drive a lot more powerful what-if type scenarios, and think about, if these things were true, how would I respond? And have those kind of plans or outlines of plans at least drafted, so that this isn't a white paper exercise when an event occurs, but we recognise it, we see it coming, and we know how we're going to respond. And again, if we think about what that takes, then we do need tools, and it's easier if we've got tools and things to help us do this. So some of the advanced planning options within some of the planning platforms are good. But even things like, where we've used network optimization tools in the past to decide how do we do things in the most effective way, we can use those to model some interruption activities. So if I lost that node in the Middle East, or in China, in Africa, in North America, what would it do? Now, what hole would it leave me in my supply chain structure? How could I reorganize? What would it take? So you can use it in an opposite way if you so choose. And I guess the challenge then is to bring that whole kind of thought process together, make recommendations based on the vulnerabilities and opportunities we see, and decide what we're going to need to do differently with the partners in this journey. So our suppliers, our logistics organisations, customs clearance, compliance organisations, even our customers and suppliers, to really think about the way that we would organise our end-to-end supply chain response to optimise and improve our level of resilience and service. Okay, so really key, but it does require leaders in the supply chain space and within the business space to drive that agenda and help make that part of the way we think and behave on a standard day-by-day basis. Now, what we also know is, as we touched in one of the previous slides, that our ability to do this is compromised by just the volume of information. The scale of business today, the world has got smaller, but it seems to have got huge in terms of data and information and selling points, whatever it might be. So we need to think, as we're looking over the future, what do we need in our arsenal to deal with the world that is developing around us and will develop over time. And I guess just some thoughts, we've touched on slightly here, but even connectivity. So the speed with which we see and can connect that information into our planning cycle is vital. So if you look at some of the things that people like Nokia are doing in private 5G networks, it's almost a private Internet of Things where businesses have their own 5G network that everything is connected through, and just speeds up that whole process of connecting this broad world in which we live today. Then applying things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to really drill into that data and all that information that's flowing around our network, to consider what we should be doing and what we could be doing based on risk and profiling. But again, it really is about the agility of analysis and the ability to see things happening in a real-time way and make decisions in an expedited way. So rapid decision making, driving advantage, which is a big part of the value that the end-to-end supply chain thought and structure can bring to the equation. Now, clearly, I've taken you through a lot of concepts and structure and thought in a very short period of time. And the aim of today was really to maybe plant some seeds in your heads and really drive that thought process, and start to consider, how do we deal with the world that is developed by choice or by design, and what do we do accordingly? So I guess pushing our traditional reference points and our paradigms is really key. And I guess the way that I would kind of summarize things is really, it's critical that we change the way we think about risk. Right? We become, as we said, neutral to risk a little bit, and have missed some of the big stuff that we've engineered advertently or inadvertently into our offering. So understand the embedded risk within our current business and supply chain designs. Think about how we have a dynamic rolling risk assessment process that is connected to our business continuity mindset. So what would happen if these things occurred? How would I respond? And that there are playbooks and mechanisms already designed and set up ready to execute. That we understand, within our supply chain structure, what flexibility we need to manage and mitigate risk, and drive that enhanced level of resilience. And that we have a way of deploying that, so a strategy over time that brings that to life. And again, that there are things we can do in the relative short term, but a lot of this is, reconfiguring just the way we've thought about owning and managing assets, the way we've structured routes into different regions, the different couriers and entry ports we use, and how, I guess, at the mercy of optimization we've become because we're putting high volume through single points. So understanding that and being able to describe that and talk to that and consider that in part of our planning process is critical. I guess the ability to see change is absolute. So what are the monitors and the condition assessment the activities and mechanisms we've got in place, and that we trust them. Again, as I said earlier, lots of organisations saw stuff coming but didn't want to believe that it was true. And I guess in human behaviour, that's understandable, but actually in business, that's really detrimental to our long-term success and the maintenance of our offering. So having that information coming towards us, connecting it in a structured way, then driving the analysis and decision-making process in an effective manner, to then create that kind of orchestrated end-to-end solution, and bring that to life in a predictable way as quickly as possible, to exploit that variation of the change and delight our customers. So, what is it that is the true value of your new offering? Because again, this isn't for free, right? So all of the things we've talked about, cost money and cause us to have to invest in a different way. So we have to be able to kind of balance that investment appraisal discussion about what does it give me versus what does it cost. And again, that if we roll that into our integrated planning process, we can have that meaningful dialogue and conversation and make business choices, and live with those choices because they drive dependability and resilience. Okay, so recognising we're at the end of my slot, and I appreciate your time. I know you're all busy people, so I appreciate your time and focus to listen. obviously these are it's a short overview of where I see things and my beliefs. It's designed to be thought-provoking, but if you do have any questions, then please channel them through the Scope organisation or through Oliver Wight Direct. Links to websites are displayed, and hopefully it's got you thinking and really activated some thoughts going into your next sort of round of planning cycle and business continuity of risk management. So thanks for your time and appreciate it, and stay safe.